Well, that brings us perfectly to our final film, which I'll be presenting. So Sherpa is a 2015 documentary made by Jennifer Peedom. It focuses on Furba Tashi, a Sherpa who has made 21 Mount Everest ascents and leads the team for New Zealander Russell Bryce's expedition company, Himalayan Experiences. After a deadly avalanche, the Sherpas stage a protest demanding better working conditions. The film explores Sherpa culture and their spiritual relationship with the mountain, as well as the heavy work and risks they are forced to take in order to aid wealthy foreign mountain climbers. Peedom does a good job allowing her subjects to present their varying perspectives, while also capturing candid moments that challenge these narratives. Beyond its fascinating social commentary, the film is also full of stunning and terrifying images of mountain climbing, including first-person shots of an avalanche. So I've been meaning to watch this film for ages, and I'm really glad I did. Thought it was a great documentary. Also a very frustrating documentary at times, considering what some of the people on film do and how they treat the Sherpas. But yeah, I really liked it. What did you guys think of Sherpa?
Yeah, I really liked it, but I also got extremely angry at it because like some things are just really horrible and frustrating to watch.
What in particular were you angry at?
What wasn't I? I mean, just in general, the treatment of the Sherpa and the way, I don't know, like what's his name, Russell, just like made me so mad.
Yeah, Russell was an interesting character because I think initially I was sort of sympathetic to him because he seemed to treat the Sherpas pretty well. Like he employed them. He seemed to like take their safety pretty seriously.
Yeah, like one thing they mentioned early on was that he cancelled an expedition, I don't know, like a year or two before the documentary is set, because he didn't judge it as safe enough to go, and he didn't want to risk. And it very much sounded like he also particularly didn't want to risk the Sherpas' lives there. But like later on, it becomes pretty clear just how much he cares about that versus his profits and stuff. And that's not a good look.
You see how hard he's working them to carry all the Westerners' luggage up the mountain. These incredibly dangerous positions he's putting them in, like repeatedly, like going back and forth up and down the mountain through, these dangerous snowdrift areas and avalanche-prone areas to just drag all of these luxuries up the mountain. And the fact that when they start to stage protests and go on, threaten strikes, he starts to espouse this narrative about, them being agitators and them, some Sherpas being bad apples that are threatening other Sherpas. And
he's really trying to pit them against each other as well. My single favorite moment in the whole thing was when we see this conversation between him and the other Sherpas, and he was like, well, people have been threatened and our Sherpas are going to have their legs broken if they go up the mountain by the other Sherpas, and then it just cuts to Purba saying, no one said anything like that to me.
I've never been threatened.
Me. That was my favorite shot in the whole thing.
Pure fabrication. The other thing that really made me angry was just all these wealthy Americans and Europeans getting hot towels handed to them by the Sherpas and cups of tea and like talking about how their dreams are coming true, cackling to one another, and then in the background you just see the Sherpas like carrying televisions up the mountain for them.
And like in the context,
disproportionate,
especially in the context of like how they risk their lives for that, right? It's not even just the fact that they're sort of like serving these Westerners here. It's also like that they literally give their lives for that at disproportionate rates, and it's just this like fun little holiday experience for people.
And it's the fact that so many of the climbers, I mean, some of them are sort of quite nice and like humble, but others are just so boastful and they're talking about living their best life, and it's like, that's fine, but it's the Sherpas that are doing all the work. Like they're the ones who should be celebrated and acclaimed, and it's like it's like all the wealthy people are getting, the ones with the camera crews and giving these speeches and whatnot.
And the Sherpas in contrast are barely treated as like people who are worth anything, right? Because they're so like disposable. So what? So few of them died, so what? This is dangerous business. the other ones should keep going. So we're like disrespecting this place that's sacred to them. So what? They're getting paid well, which is also with the pay. The thing is also this seems like really good pay compared to sort of what you can make in Nepal, but it's like such a tiny fraction of the money that tourists actually pay the companies.
Yeah,
So,
the Sherpas take the biggest risks. They clearly do the most work, but they get such a small fraction of the wealth that is generated by this industry of mountain climbing up Mount Everest. One thing you touched on there was one interesting dynamic I thought the film presented was the Sherpas' perception of the mountain versus the Westerners or the foreigners' perspective of the mountain, because the foreigners see it as this thing to be conquered. This thing to be climbed up and plant your flag on and raise your hands to the sky and call yourself the king of the world. Whereas the Sherpas are like, no, this is like a really sacred place. They call it like the mother mountain or the goddess mountain. And they say, oh, it's actually, we don't think it's respectful to actually stand upon it or climb up it. Which reminds me of something that a similar landmark in Australia, which is Uluru, which is this giant hundreds of million-year-old rock formation in the middle of the country, in the middle of the desert. And anytime, like for decades, whenever white people have gone there, they've immediately just started climbing up it. Whereas the indigenous people really don't want you to do that because it's this really sacred rock. And they say, please don't climb on it. It's meant to be treated respectfully. And also there's, dozens of deaths every year of people falling off it. And that's really distressing to the Aboriginal Australian people. Which potentially is something the Sherpas also find really, in this film, they find it really distressing when Sherpas die on the mountain and they're like, no, we cannot step on the mountain again. It's really disrespectful to the people who have died on it.
Yeah.
So I thought that contrast between like the Western and the local treatment of the mountain is really interesting.
And I think one big problem was also they touch on this fight that happened the previous year, where I think one big problem was that someone called one of the Sherpas a swear word or something. And in one of the clips that we see as footage of that, someone is saying, you can't say that in this place, which I guess is a bit like, I don't know, like I guess you're not really supposed to swear in a church or something. That's disrespectful. And to them, that's probably quite similar in that sense that you should like behave in a certain way in this holy place if you are going to be there. And like one aspect, I think, is just the disrespect to the Sherpa that comes from, just hurling insults at them. But the other thing is also just disrespecting the sacred place by speaking that way there.
What did you think of the film, Pukar?
Yeah, so like I think a lot of the points that I was thinking you've already kind of mentioned anyway. It's this sort of like, I don't know. I've made it just feels like a bit of a very privileged perspective to say, well, now I'm gonna go climb this mountain and risk my life in doing so. I mean, like me, having grown up in Nepal, I don't remember anyone around me being like, "Oh, we're gonna go climb this mountain."
Like for fun, like right?
Yeah, I don't know. I just never understood it, and I guess I don't understand it now. But then also, like, even if it is a point of challenge, it seems a bit ridiculous that you have these people who are clearly very wealthy to be able to afford. I think someone mentioned something around like $100,000 for like these trips, and they're going up the mountain like once or twice, and like the Sherpas are going like 20-30 times a year, and like no, there isn't as much recognition of that. People are amazed where they're like, wow, you conquered this incredible challenge of going up the tallest mountain in the world, but what about the people who do it like 30 times a year? And like there's just
much
no
less of the safety that they then provide for the tourists. Because obviously it's still dangerous for tourists doing it, but it just gets made so much safer by the work that the Sherpa put in. And they don't have that, right? Like they are the ones who go up there putting down the ropes and stuff that then make it safer, but they don't have those safeties when they climb up. And in the film, I also thought they mentioned some of the Westerners mentioned a few times that the Sherpa are just so like naturally predisposed to high altitudes and these dangers and so on. And to me, that seemed like such a reductive way of looking at these people and just saying, I don't know, like they can expose themselves to these risks, which are still risks, obviously, because like that's basically what they were born for. And it also very much seems to sort of reduce them to that being their purpose in life, to serve Westerners, like to serve Western tourists, because that's just what they were born for. It seemed like a very reductive way of looking at these people.
Yeah, well, supposedly there is some truth to that. Like genetically, people from Tibet or people from the Sherpas in Nepal do have like, I don't know, there's something about their oxygen flow. They have a better oxygen flow and they can survive better at higher altitudes. I think they call it the super athletes gene or something like that. But yeah, it certainly shouldn't diminish the actual physical labor they're doing on the mountains or the planning and the skill and intelligence that they possess in making it safely up the mountains, setting up the ropes and the tents and taking care of all these Westerners who don't have these athletic genes.
Yeah, and they also shouldn't be reduced to that. Like, that's not the only thing about these people. Like, they're still,
No, of course not.
Yeah.
And it's also like I think some of the sort of the commentary from the tourists who are going there were, well, they're getting paid, right? Well, they're this is their job, this is what they're getting paid for, and I'm sure they're getting paid well for it, and all of that. But I think it doesn't quite recognize the fact that Purva doesn't want this for his kids. Like, he's only doing this because it brings food on the table. No, like no one there. I don't think any Sherpa there said, "Oh yeah, I willingly want to do this." Because I don't know, this is something I enjoy. It seemed more like we need the money, and this brings a lot of money to the table.
Some of them say they do enjoy mountaineering, but it does seem like they would not necessarily want to risk their lives for tourists all the time, and this sort of like very frivolous activity, I guess. Yeah.
I thought the film also did a good job of exploring like the figure, like the mythic figure of the Sherpa in contemporary culture or Western culture, and its origins in the first ever British ascent of Mount Everest, which was a guy named Edmund Hillary, and he had this Sherpa guide with him named Tenzing Norgay. And it includes footage of the ascent, footage of interviews with Norgay, and also interviews with his children. And one thing it sort of looks at is the fact that Norgay was positioned as this kind of like happy helper to Hillary's, glorious ascent. And it kind of has like, the question is put to Edmund, who actually got to the top of Mount Everest first, and he kind of brushes it aside, and then they ask Norgay the same thing, and he brushes it aside, and Hillary got this very prestigious. Yeah, Hillary got this very prestigious medal, and they only gave this sort of secondary medal to Norgay, which the Sherpa community felt was very disrespectful. And it seems like that stereotype of the sort of happy helper sort of persists in the Western imagination to this day, and that they're not really treated as the great, climbers and athletes that they are. They're just seen as these kind of happy helpers.
It also very much seems like situationally, like it seems like you can very much sort of pick and choose how you want to view them, because they're like portrayed as these very like, again, like happy people, peaceful people. But then whenever they do anything that like slightly disagrees with any Westerners, there's suddenly this like almost these like they're portrayed as these like savages, which is really not like what we can see in the footage that were being shown. Like, that's really not what I found really impressive was when that avalanche first happens, and then the Sherpa sort of liaise with the Westerners to see who gets to fly up in the first helicopter to try and retrieve their people. They just very calmly say, "We're angry with you," in like a really sort of calm way. It's not like they're like attacking them, mobbing them or anything. And then later they get sort of portrayed as these like savages who want to kill people and break people's legs if they go against their group consensus. And this seems to be such a sort of reductive image that seems to just sort of be perpetuated whenever it sort of makes for like a more convenient narrative. And it just seems to be so far from, so like disconnected from the truth. It doesn't seem to matter what the truth actually is and what they're actually like. It's just whatever image is most convenient right now, be that like the fun, smiley, peaceful one or the violent, savages one, whatever just fits the moment better.
Yeah, and I think the documentarian Jennifer Peedom does a good job of like letting people speak and letting Russell, for example, spin this narrative about them being violent and agitators just because basically they want safe conditions and a better share of the their labor. But then, showing the footage of them acting very respectful and civil and just discussing among themselves about how they're going to organize, and showing none of the evidence of this supposed violence or aggression. The one bit of violence we get is the flashback from the previous year where one of the Sherpas sort of slaps a European man for calling him a racial slur. But that seemed pretty justified. And I think the European, it came out later that the European also attacked him, or threw snow at him or something like that. It sort of speaks to this attitude amongst the Western mountaineers of treating the Sherpas very disrespectfully, and we see that with some of them later in the film. Like one American says, can't we just talk to the Sherpas' owners or something like that, like treating them like just slaves.
Jesus, when I got so angry when I heard that.
Yeah,
I don't quite understand why. I don't know. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding something, but why you would treat someone who is helping you do this very dangerous thing so disrespectfully. It just seems crazy to me.
I think they just don't even notice it. I think their point of contact are the organizers, people, Westerners like Russell, who kind of explain and mediate everything, and then he tells the Sherpas what to do. And the Sherpas seem to do it all at night. So as far as the mountaineers are concerned, they wake up in the morning, do a bit of climbing, and their tents and their luxury is already set up for them.
They don't know how hard, or I'm sure they're aware that this needs to be done, but they don't see how difficult it is, how dangerous it is. I think also because there is this sort of mythical image of these Sherpas being these superhuman people who are just so well suited to this that it's probably really easy for them, right? I'm sure it's not a challenge even, because it sort of gets portrayed that way. So
yeah, it's natural to them, and it does seem like at least for some of them, a lot of these people are quite wealthy, and the documentary seems to suggest they're just so used to being served and so used to having money just solve all of their problems that they don't even notice all the work and the danger that goes into it. And I don't want to tar everyone with that brush, because there are a few examples of people who are actually always dreamed of this and aren't particularly rich. They've saved up their whole life for this. And they are actually quite deferential to the Sherpas. They say, no, they are putting the risk, and no, I still want to go up the mountain, but I respect the fact that the Sherpas want to respect to their fallen comrades, or they want better conditions. So it's not all of the mountain climbers, but certainly a few of them are quite galling in their attitudes.
It's very I think the documentary does a good way of showing how exploitative it is. I don't think I saw a single sort of Nepali operator, so someone who actually headed up. Most of them were, I think, Westerners who were running them, sort of the head, the one who gets sort of the biggest share of profits here. Didn't really seem to be anyone Nepali, which is that. And then the other side is sort of they're not only exploited by these Western operators, but they're also by their own government. And, so the government does charge a license, and a substantial chunk of money goes to the government to allow these climbs to happen. And so, there is an element of the government doesn't want to lose the revenue from that. And the people who run the government don't want to lose the revenue from that. So, I did get the sense from Russell that he had more of a sway with the government than was portrayed in the documentary, purely because of the money.
Try and talk the Sherpas down, right? Someone from the government comes in, and I wonder, couldn't you have used that sway to try and convince the government to make things could you not have advocated for the people working for you?
Then you have to pay them. Then you have to pay them more money, give away more of your pie if you're a organizer.
Who wants that, right? But earlier he claimed to he claims to care about these people, right? And that's sort of how you can really tell when it comes down to it, the thing that he cares about is his profit and his own benefit. So.
He cares about them only insofar as they do what they're told. When they ask for more or they don't do what they're told, then he gets vindictive. But I think the film is also a good cautionary tale about the dangers of just excessive capitalism, because it shows these amazing images of Mount Everest just covered in climbers, like ants just streaming up the mountain. It's a massive industry. And the Sherpas bear the brunt of all of this traffic. It doesn't seem like there's any attempts by the government to regulate this traffic or this growth of industry. And that's why there's the deaths there are, because these people, the Sherpas, are going up and down the mountain so many times to accommodate so much traffic that inevitably there's a disaster and it kills a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And more in subsequent years, apparently. So yeah, I think I thought it was really inspiring to see them actually say no. And part of it's like, this is a sacred space, and we don't want to disrespect our fallen comrades, and that's admirable. But it's also about, we see that we're being exploited. We see that this run off the rails. We see that there's like a very much a colonial kind of mindset happening here. It's white Western tour managers coming in and exploiting the local labor force and giving them, peanuts for the amount of money that's revenue. So I thought it was really inspiring to see all the workers organize and stage protests and put forth demands, and quite a happy ending, because you see, obviously it's a simplistic, we don't know the full story, but apparently they do get pretty much all of their demands fulfilled, and there were, restrictions put on the amount of climbers that could go up Mount Everest to reduce some of these deaths. So,
but it does also, like, the two organizers also do seem to kind of have this savior view of themselves, where they say, well, we are giving them these jobs, like, we're doing good things for them, we are giving them these jobs, we are paying them well, they're earning much more here than they would do in some sort of average job that generates like an average income that's common for a Nepali person. So they are sort of portraying themselves as helping these people and doing good things when they're still just like making so much like additional profit out of it, and they're not passing on a lot of the profit they're making to the Sherpas, and they still get paid so much less than would be sort of like a fair share of what these tour organizers are making out of it.
I think so, it does end in some sort of happy ending of changes in who's allowed to climb and all of that, but I think money speaks quite a lot in Nepal. And I really wonder, again, it's one of those things that we discussed earlier, is that while these things are legally put into place and in writing, I really question how much of it actually gets enforced and how much of it gets bent if there is enough money involved. And for these sort of things, there seems to be quite a lot of money involved anyway, particularly because I don't think they've had much of a chance to have these things put into place given COVID and the earthquake. There's been a bit of a stall of people who had the chance to sort of climb the mountain anyway. Post-COVID, we'll see. But yeah, I'm a bit skeptical about how much of a difference this will make.
Yeah, I guess it's relatively recent reforms. We'll see how it plays out in the coming decades. But Jennifer Peedom seems to have a pretty good relationship with the subjects, and she's made several documentaries about Nepal or about Mount Everest. So hopefully she has a more of an insider's view about how the reforms fail or succeed.
Have you watched any of those other documentaries by her?
No, this is the only one I've watched, but I would be interested. She directed another film called Mountain in 2017, which isn't specifically about Mount Everest, but it's looking at high peaks around the world and human beings' relationship to those peaks.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Because I do really like sort of her style and her sort of way of giving people voices and sort of just letting people speak for themselves. And I think the Sherpas were saying that as well at some point, that like they weren't being talked to a lot, and like there was like a lot of journalists and media and so on, but no one was talking to the actual Sherpa themselves. Everyone was talking to like the tour organizers and tourists and so on. And it's really good that she's just giving them plenty of opportunity to talk.
Which is the danger of having mediators like that who have their own interests, and we see Russell very clearly putting his own spin on events.
So just I'm just very quickly Googling this, but apparently Nepal issued a record number of permits this year, worth about $4.2 million.
Really? Oh,
apparently.
I thought they'd reduced permits.
I've just Googled this, and
I guess they have to make up for the COVID lost revenue, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's not as simple as sort of the government saying, you know what, we don't need this anymore because there's sort of a holy religious side and people are dying. The money is needed. The government, if assuming the government sort of uses it for the public good, then this is a legitimate source of revenue for the government that they could use for lots of other needs that Nepal has. It's just a question of whether that money goes to where it goes to. But without even going into that, this is definitely a source of revenue, and I think the Nepali government has been criticized on this, but I don't know. I'm just googling this, and I'm not sure whether this is completely accurate. Would have to double check that. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, actually, one more thought. One more thought on Sherpa, and maybe this is something that sort of is a thought for all the other films, but so it's around Nepali language, and so the language that Purva was speaking, I couldn't understand it. Neither could I understand the language Dia and her parents were speaking. But the language that Dia and Kieran were speaking with most people when they were sort of interacting with, I don't know, someone on the road, someone at a bar, etc.,
and each other as well.
And each other, that I could understand, and it's sort of a recognition that I think Nepal has like 129 languages with a bunch of different dialects as well. It's the sort of the language that gets used in courts, and sort of the default language is the one that I understand. It is the language that was used by the ruling class back when the monarchy existed, and I think there was a push to make sure that that was the only language that was spoken, so it kind of became the default language. But there is a variety of different languages, and I think it's sort of a point what I wanted to make was that it's just, Nepal it just does not have sort of a single language that you can sort of say this is the Nepali language, and there was the reason I point this out is because we were looking at the subtitles for the Sherpa, and there was a bit where it said something like XYZ person speaks a foreign language, and it just seemed a bit amusing to just say speaks a foreign language, but given that Nepal has so many different languages, I guess you just maybe whoever did the subtitles couldn't quite figure out which language they were speaking.
I think it would have been quite nice if they'd sort of managed to figure that out, and at least, if not translated, at least sort of say which language they're speaking in. But I don't know.
Well, the Sherpa people come from Tibet originally, don't they?
Yeah, they're nomadic Tibetans, I believe.
Yeah, right. So I guess they would have their own dialects. What's the main dialect called? Pukar.
So Nepali is just I don't know if it has a name. I think it might be Gorkhali as well in some contexts.
Okay.
So that's the language of the sort of the ruling caste, which is what that's the caste I'm from, and so this is the language that is the default language for me, but it is definitely not the default language for most people. For a lot of people, I think this particular caste, the caste I'm in, there's like, if I remember correctly, I think there's like 12% of people in Nepal are from this caste. So it's not like.
Is the language close to any Indian languages or Indian dialects?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same script as Hindi. And the pronunciation can vary, but it is also quite similar.
There's a few words that are the same as well, right?
Yeah, there are a few words that are very similar and the same. So yeah, it really depends. I'm literally just Googling Nepali language on Wikipedia, and like it's there's loads of like all the languages are recognized as national languages, even though there's like 130 of them. But the one that gets primarily used if you're not sure which language to use to speak to someone in Nepal, you'd want to use Nepali language, so the Gorkhali language as a default, because that's the one that you assume people know, even if it is as a second language.
Because I think I was reading that like the Gurkha Empire was once like Nepal and India under the same banner, so maybe that's how that language maybe came to establish itself among the ruling classes. That's just pure speculation, but
yeah,
I noticed that word had popped up before.
Yeah, I'm not too sure on that one. I don't. My Nepali history doesn't go that far back.
Fascinating. I also thought it was funny in Sungaba, they occasionally slip into English. Is that common in Nepal?
Yeah, common and an ongoing frustration of my dad.
It's so funny. It's so random. Just have
your
one
dad does
sentence
it
in
too,
English.
though, right?
I mean, yeah. So it's one of those things where I think English is just so pervasive. I can't even say it right now.
Pervasive?
Clearly, it's not because I can't speak it right now.
No.
It's just English just goes everywhere, and
just gets everywhere like mud.
yeah, and like a lot of the cultural influence comes from Hollywood and Bollywood, and India itself. A lot of Indians also get influenced by Hollywood, and English tends to be the sort of the default language to use for business contracts. It might be sort of the default language to use if you're not sure how to communicate with someone who doesn't speak the language, right? And so you have a lot of Nepalis who, for given that they know English already, for the sake of convenience, they might sort of flip between them. So when I'm speaking with my parents, sometimes I'll use an English word in the middle of a Nepali word. There is a growing frustration where people say, well, then you end up losing the Nepali language as a result, right? Like if people sort of, for convenience, adopt more and more English words into Nepali, then you're sort of maybe eventually you'll forget what the Nepali word was for a particular thing. And so there is a lot of sort of background and debate about that as well, but it is quite common that people will just randomly use some English now and then to refer to a certain thing or to, I don't know, say a certain phrase.
That's good for me because I sometimes understand some things that you talk to your parents on the phone about. if you switch to English, quite helpful. But yeah, that was definitely interesting. On sort of a similar, well, maybe somewhat related note on languages, I just wanted to, I think it's sort of worth keeping in mind that the word Sherpa has become such a sort of independently used word that can like mean all sorts of things, like mainly probably like Mount Everest guide, but also maybe sort of guide in general, or also like a person who carries things and so on. So it's taken on quite a meaning of its own. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that it was just, like a name of this specific ethnic group that has sort of very much been stripped of its original meaning to now mean something that's sort of more convenient or more relevant to Westerners.
It's very much of a brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's worth pointing out that like not all Sherpas are mountain climbers. They have their own unique culture and cultural beliefs and languages.
Yeah, and also not all people
have just taken this one aspect of their culture, or just a couple of people in their culture, and sort of implanted it onto their entire culture.
Yeah, and also not all people that sort of work as what would be called Sherpas, as in these Mount Everest mountain guides, are actually Sherpa people.
Yeah,
so it goes both ways, right? And I think it's quite valuable to bear that in mind, that sort of the way the word Sherpa is used in English is sort of quite sort of stripping that away from that original meaning, which is just these people, without any of the sort of functional connotation of these other people that help us be tourists on Mount Everest.
Yeah, like Sherpa and like Kathmandu have become such a brand, especially for like camping and mountaineering gear and products. I mean, like if you, I just Googled like Sherpa products, and the first thing that came up is like Sherpa pet carriers. Okay. Or like Sherpa adventure gear, and it's all about stuff like to do with camping and camping gear, and like it's become such a brand when all it really is just a name of a specific group of people, and then I think all it really means is just like people from the East. But it just seems a bit odd and exploitative to use that.
Another thing that really struck me in the film was that I mean, obviously we didn't see that happen here, so we don't know if that's necessarily true, but it just struck me as quite like they do obviously make an effort to retrieve the Sherpa that are like injured or die in that avalanche, but it does feel like it's very much sort of I feel like if it had been Westerners that had died, I think the approach would have been quite different, especially sort of around how it's treated afterwards and sort of the respect and sort of the demand that these people just get over the loss that they and their community have experienced. I have a hard time imagining that would be the same if the lives lost were lives that are sort of perceived to have a higher value because they're Westerners' lives, and I found that quite frustrating. Yeah.
And the exploitation of Sherpa guides like goes back decades. Like even in the 1920s, the British were trying to climb Mount Everest, and I think I read that there was an avalanche, and the message that went back to the base camp was like no white lives lost.
Yeah.
And even back then, the Sherpas were like outraged and went on strike by the way they were being treated. So Sherpa industrial action goes back decades as well.
Yeah, and that clearly just shows the difference in value assigned to their lives versus Westerners' lives. So
yeah.
I think sort of going to the perspective of the given the sort of the fight that broke out and the way that Russell was sort of portraying some of the guides as sort of the hooligans or
savages.
Like savages. I think there was a really strong contrast to that in the documentary where there was a scene where they were just sort of everyone was grouped around in like a circle and they were discussing what to do, right? They were discussing what was unfair, they were discussing what was wrong. And it wasn't like you could tell they were upset about this, but it was a discussion they were having and they were discussing about what isn't working, how they're feeling. Right, and that seemed like that was them unionizing. That was them deciding that money isn't enough for the risks they're taking and the friends they're losing. And they were making this sort of unionized action, and I thought that was a really good sort of contrast to him saying, they're sort of a couple of crazy people who've riled everyone up, or that they were savages. I thought that was really good. Yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and it wasn't they weren't like rioting or anything, and if they were, I feel like that would have been understandable. But they were just, all they were doing was like thinking about their own well-being and safety, and like how dare they? Because clearly that's an outrageous thing for them to be doing.
Shows the power of good editing, I think, to contrast those scenes against one another.
Yeah, I do think the documentary did well contrasting that, and they could have easily just sided with the Westerners here and portrayed it the way they're trying to portray it, and I appreciate that they didn't do that.
I don't know how you both felt, but my heart broke every time I saw Purva's wife.
Oh my god, yeah.
Oh man, yeah.
No, that was so miserable. Yeah.
Every time. I think those sort of imagery were good. I'm still sort of up in the air about portrayal of grief in documentaries and stuff like that, particularly when it is a commercial product. With Purva's wife and her saying, I don't want him to go, I don't want him to die, and that grief, that didn't hit me as wrongly. Is the one where I think there was an implication that the Sherpas who died, there were shots of the family members.
Yeah, and one of them
as they were grieving
as well, and they showed the wife and the baby, I think.
Yeah, I felt a bit conflicted about that because there is a completely separate conversation to be had about sort of the commoditization of pictures of grief and of grieving families. I don't know. What did you two think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very good point. I think there's a lot of value in humanizing that and just sort of like contrasting that, because when you see, for example, Russell talk about what happened, it's just this very sort of functional and like calculating way of it's almost more like a loss of resources than a loss of human life. And I do think there's value in showing these are humans, they have families that love them and that are like very deeply impacted by this loss. So I think there's a lot of value in that. But then you definitely have a good point about the fact that this is still a documentary and still also makes money and it does sort of commodify this grief in a way. So I don't have an answer to this or anything. It's just there's definitely two sides to this.
Yeah, I didn't feel it was excessive or exploitational. I mean, she was obviously it seemed as if she was interviewing the different family members, and that's what they felt like, expressing to her and being recorded as saying to her. So I don't think they were tricked or anything. But it is a good point about like the point of the film is that, or one of the topics that the film addresses is the exploitation of the Sherpa people by the mountain climbing industry, but in another sense, like, filmmaking is also an industry, and in a sense you could argue maybe the Sherpas are also being monetized by the documentary filmmaker, or their grief or their loss or their struggles are also being monetized in a sense, or they're not seeing the returns that the documentarian might be seeing. I don't think it's unethical necessarily, and I think it draws attention to an important problem and can do good by drawing attention to a problem. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth bearing in mind that there's these kinds of implications here as well. Even though I do think ultimately it's good that we were shown this side and just reminded or like confronted with the fact that these are, human people. This is real loss of life. There's real grief and tragedy around this. In the same way there would be if Westerners died, because, they're people too, as it turns out. But I do also wonder, I mean, we don't really know sort of what's going on behind the scenes here. And like, presumably, hopefully they were paid for giving these interviews. How much were they paid and how desperate did they feel about having to accept that payment? Like, how much of a choice was it to be interviewed for this and to sort of display their grief for this? Because I get the sense that even though none of the Sherpas or none of the Sherpa guides are forced to work on the mountain, in that sense that, like no one's making them do it, I do get the sense that some of them feel forced to do it just sort of for economic reasons, and because it is still, even though it's the payment isn't proportional to the income that's being made off their backs, it's still a lot of money for them, and they wouldn't easily be able to make that elsewhere, so they're still sort of forced to keep doing it. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Another thing I found really interesting was reading up on stuff afterwards that Purba apparently still, like, he stopped going up Mount Everest, but he still continued to work with and for Russell in the base camp and so on. So I did not come out of this feeling great about Russell. And I personally can't imagine I'd particularly want to work for him. And I found it interesting that Purba continues to work for and with him.
I mean, he pays right, like he gives him a wage, but no, Russell does not come off well. There's this one thing that keeps coming to mind when I think of Russell is there's a moment when like people die and then the guides are like, well, people, our friends and family are dead, we need to stop, this is too dangerous, right? And he's and one of the things that Russell says is you can't stop climbing just because someone dies. That's the risk. And I'm just sort of thinking, like, in what office or industry would people be like, oh, someone died, let's not like stop business,
take some time off,
unless it's completely critical that this work continues on. I genuinely cannot think of like anywhere where people would say, well, actually, let's just keep going. At least in the Western companies and in like UK and US and stuff like that. It just seemed bonkers for him to even say something like that.
Yeah, it's basically he's demanding they pretend nothing happened, really. Just like, get over it, right? Like, you knew it was a risky thing, so why don't you just get over it? Which is such a horrible perspective to take when there's such tragedy and loss of life. So, yeah.
But and final point I want to sort of bring up was the freeing ability of the internet and having that sort of ability to access information. Because I think one of the things that one of them pointed out was that in the past, the guides wouldn't have this information available to them. They wouldn't be able to just go on their phones and look up information about what's going on, and even maybe they wouldn't even find out about what sort of prices the operators are charging their clients and stuff like that. But now they're the guides are a bit more educated and have access to this information, or potentially have access to this information, and so are able to sort of see through any deceptions, or at least find out about whether they're being underpaid or getting sort of a shorter end of the stick. And I thought that was sort of a good point to make about the ability of communications and the internet to sort of free up that knowledge so that people can demand better rights and better wages for this very risky thing that they do.
Yeah. And with how biased the things were that Russell said, like, you can imagine that the Sherpas were not going to get like unbiased information from anyone who's profiting off of them. So yeah.
And apparently some of them are going overseas and getting like climbing licenses and coming back and saying, I can do this as good as any of you. I'm going to start my own company, or I'm going to lead the organization from now on.
Yeah, that's definitely where the money should be going. Like it's quite telling that all the people doing sort of the dangerous work, the grunt work, are the local people, and then it's people coming from overseas that are taking like the real profit. That doesn't locals.
Yeah, and I think that sort of there's an element of that which I think is interesting in that in the previous film, White Sun, one of the elders sort of brings it up is about people leaving the country to gain skills and contacts and resources, and bringing them back to Nepal, and so like, you know, if there are people sort of leaving the country, getting their own sort of licenses, and then running their own tour operators and all of that, power to them. But I think there's sort of a greater extent of people saying, well, actually, the opportunities I have in Nepal just aren't enough, and I need to leave the country and find sort of a better life elsewhere. And so if everyone is sort of focusing on doing that, then any opportunities that are at home are more likely to be exploited by, I don't know, like Western operators, right? Like they clearly see an opportunity here, and they sort of capitalize on it. But yeah, that's a completely different topic about sort of the brain drain and the loss of human resources with Nepal, with a lot of people moving abroad, like my parents did, and a lot of other Nepalis do as well.